Chapter 27 Al-Naml. The Ants, revealed at Mecca, 7 sections, 93 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from the mention in verse 18 of a tribe known as the Naml in connection with Solomon's march against the Queen of Sheba. For the date of revelation and its relation to the preceding chapter, refer to the last chapter's note. Al-Qur'an is the word of God, which the Holy Prophet received from on high, just as Moses received a call at Mount Sinai, and the enemies of the former would be dealt with, even as those of the latter. This is the substance of the first section. The second and third are devoted to Solomon's history, wherein the Holy Prophet's future greatness is indicated. It is really a part of Mosaic history, for the Israelite kingdom attained its full glory under Solomon, and Moses passed away before any Israelitish kingdom was established. On the other hand, the Holy Prophet Muhammad was destined to combine prophetic greatness with kingship. The glory of Solomon with the lowliness of Moses. In his lifetime, he was recognized as the king of Arabia, yet, notwithstanding his being crowned with kingly glory, he led a life of marked simplicity. The rest of the chapter is taken up with a brief reference in the fourth section to the histories of Saleh and Lot, whose opponents were destroyed, and the fifth may be regarded as the natural sequel, that the faithful shall be exalted. The sixth section states, however, that the prophet's triumph was not to be marked by the utter destruction of his enemies, as in the case of these prophets, but by ultimate spiritual resurrection of those who seemed to be quite deaf, dumb, and dead. I thought I was going to say blind, but yeah. That none but the great opponents would pass away is shown in the last section. And isn't this the chapter that has the extra Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim? Yep, verse 30. It's part of verse 30. Chapter 28. Al-Qasas, the narrative. Revealed at Mecca, 9 sections, 88 verses. This chapter is known as the narrative, is devoted chiefly to Moses' story, and draws attention pointedly to Moses' prophecy regarding the prophet's advent. It is said by some to have been revealed to the Holy Prophet when fleeing from Mecca on his way to Medina, at a place known as Jahfa. According to others, however, only verse 85, which predicted a number of triumphal return of the Holy Prophet to Mecca, was revealed there. The latter seems to be the correct view. See the introductory note to the 26th chapter. The prophet's likeness to Moses is the chief theme of this chapter, and the revelation of Moses is here spoken of as clear evidence of the truth of the revelation of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. The first 4 sections of the chapter are taken up with the recital of the chief incidents of the life of Moses, of the time of his birth to the time he successfully led the Israelites out of Egypt, together with the drowning of the hosts of Egypt. Here we find many of the details of this period not given elsewhere. Moses' narrative is followed by showing in the 5th section that a prophet like him had now appeared, to whose truth the revelation of Moses bore a clear testimony. The 6th section upholds the truth of the revelation of Al-Qur'an, while the 7th shows that its opponents will be humbled. The 8th instances Korah, Qarun, whose very wealth led to his ruin, and is a warning to the opponents against placing too great a faith upon earthly possessions, or it may be a warning to the Muslimin against the time when they will grow rich and powerful. The chapter ends with the declaration of the ultimate triumph of the Holy Prophet and of his triumphal entry into the very city from whence he was now being expelled. Chapter 29, Al-Ankabut, the spider, revealed at Mecca, 7 sections, 69 verses. This chapter is entitled The Spider from the fact that false, idolatrous, and polytheistic, or at least misassociating ways, there's more types of mushrik than polytheism, are here, verse 41, compared with the spider web. The significance is clear. False beliefs will not stand the test of time, and they shall be swept away before the strong current of truth. This chapter and the 3 following form another group of Meccan revelation, each being headed by the letters Aleph, Lam, Mim, and each containing clear prophecies of the onward march of Islam, and may be given the name of the Aleph, Lam, Mim Meccan group. These chapters belong to the close of the early or the beginning of the middle Meccan period. The last chapter predicted in plain words a triumphal return of the Holy Prophet to Mecca, thus indicating the triumph of Islam. Here we are told that the great object of the triumph of truth has never been achieved except by, well, not difficult, enduring sore afflictions and severe trials in its cause. Hence, trials and persecutions were necessary. Starting thus, there is a reference to the persecution of the children by their very parents, and the converts to Islam are told that they must yield to their parents in all other matters, but must resolutely reject false doctrines. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th sections make brief references to the histories of Noah, Abraham, Lot, and other prophets, showing how the righteous had always to undergo trials, and how they were subjected to persecutions. But false beliefs had no basis and were always being swept away by truth. At the end of the 4th section, false beliefs are compared with the spider's web, thus illustrating their extreme frailty. The 5th section refers to the purifying effect of Al-Qur'an, and the repeated demand for more signs is met with the simple answer that the holy word of God was in itself a sufficiently clear sign, because it wrought a transformation in the lives of those who followed it. The 6th section warns the disbelievers of the fate in store for them, and of the consequences of their tyrannical persecutions of al-Muslimin. It also comforts the latter by stating that their sufferings would soon be changed into a state of happiness. The 7th section shows that Allah, the singular and definitive term for God in Arabic, who deals mercifully even with the disbelievers, will not allow the exertions of the faithful and the cause of truth to remain unfruitful, and that those who strive hard and earnestly will be guided in the right way, which is the way to success. And by not following in doctrines, we're obviously referring also to, acting out principles contrary to Islam. Even at the point of, if they ask you to do wasteful things with your time, even if it just seems like it's just of no value, that's not, like if a fiction seems benign, it doesn't really seem harmful or beneficial. It's just, you don't have to spend your time in that. And certainly more of the people who say this unlawful thing, do this, or this lawful thing like prayer or something. Well, I don't want you saying a prayer, or at least I don't want you saying your prayer standing and bowing and all that. Chapter 30, Arum, the Romans, reveal at Mecca, 6 sections, 60 verses. And we can also say the Byzantium and, both those kingdoms which were shown by that term. The chapter receives its name from the important prophecy regarding the victory of the Romans over the Persians, who, at the time of prophecy, had overrun the whole of the Roman Empire and were almost knocking at the gates of Constantinople. But the importance of this chapter does not lie in this prophecy alone. Lies in rest, not, but in another and a grander prophecy declared along with it. This is the prophecy of the victory of al-Muslimin over their mighty foe, the Quraysh, the circumstance which, in light of all events on which human interference could be based, was an impossibility. This prophecy saw its fulfillment in the Battle of Badr, which took place in the same year as the victory of the Romans over the Persians. Indeed, the one thing common to this group of 4 chapters, the 29th, the 30th, the 31st, and the 32nd, which begin with the Aleph Lam Mim, is the grand and majestic utterance that a great nation was about to be raised from the dead land of Arabia. And this prophecy, though clearly mentioned in all these chapters, finds the clearest expression here. The date of revelation of this chapter is put by the best authorities in the 6th or 7th year before the Hijra. And the sound of the 32nd blends more with the type of thing you're going to see in the 36th. So you see the pairing by sound and theme, not, there's an exception in that case. I mean, you can tell by hearing it that everything in Qur'an is Qur'an. Even people who don't have the Qur'an memorized are like, yeah, I can tell that's a prophetic saying, or that's not even a prophetic saying, even if they don't know. They don't know from learning that this is this. They can tell by the style. The chapter opens with a reference to the Roman defeat and immediately declares a prophecy of Rome's triumph over her foe, and adds a prophecy of a great Muslim victory over the oppressors at the same time. The second section speaks of the 2 parties of believers and disbelievers, stating that their respective conditions will soon be reversed, the Muslimin getting the upper hand. The third section refers to the manifestation of a divine power in nature as an indication that a manifestation of the same power will bring about the triumph of Islam. The fourth section shows that the spiritual triumph of Islam is a certainty, because responding as it does to human nature and answering all the requests of the natural religion of man, it must ultimately appeal to man's nature and be accepted universally. This triumph is stated in the next section was to be accomplished by a great and wonderful transformation in Arabia. Those who doubted the accomplishment of such a revolution on account of the mighty oppression to the progress of Islam are told in the concluding section that the overthrow of opposition was absolutely certain. And interestingly enough, we see what could be said to be the soulmate verse, but not soulmate. Oh, well, there's only one out there, and if you don't find it, or if you miss the opportunity, there's no, not that sort of soulmate doctrine. So you might want to look at that. And verse 30, talking about the natural way, which there was, conflicts between these different peoples here. Chapter 31, with nature, the Zoroastrians and the people called Zoroastrians and the people called Christians were, they had taken issue with their own natures, you could say, and the natural world. They went too far in their dichotomies. Chapter 31, Luqman, the wise man, or something like that, revealed at Mecca, 4 sections, 34 verses. The name of this chapter is taken from that of the sage to whose story it refers. Luqman was an Ethiopian, and his mention here testifies to the breadth of the fundamental principles of Islam alluded to in the last chapter. The aim of this chapter is, like its sister chapters, to ensure the success of believers. It belongs, like its 2 predecessors, to the Middle Meccan period. The first section asserts in unmistakable terms the success of al-Muslimin. The second refers to the vice of Luqman to his son, which was now meant for the Muslimin. The third speaks of the greatness of a divine power which could bring about such an impossible thing as the triumph of the Muslimin over their enemies, and the fourth foretells the doom of the mighty opponents. And it ends with a verse that draws attention to how, yes, you had the story of a wise man. Well, I mean, this isn't the verse. You have the story of a wise man, and then you close with how utterly omniscient God is. In the inner and outer processes that you encounter. By outer, I mean, the outer nature and then the inner nature. Chapter 32, Al-Sajda, the adoration. Good chapter to say in the dawn prayer of Friday. Real at Mecca, 3 sections, 30 verses. The name of this chapter, Al-Sajda, or the adoration, is taken verse 15, where the faithful are spoken of as falling down in adoration when the divine messages are recited to them. It contains not only a prophecy referring to the immediate triumph of Islam, but also another relating to the distinct future. Verse 5. The first section foretells the establishment of Islam. The second speaks of a punishment for the opponents in this very life, and the third of raising of the dead, earth to life. And the sort of effect you see in Surah 32 is even stronger with 36. Chapter 33, Al-Ahzab, the allies, revealed at Medina, 9 sections, 73 verses. This chapter goes under the name of the allies, by which are meant the Quraysh, confederated with other idolatrous tribes and the Jews. The opponents had now planned to exterminate the Muslimin altogether, and mustering more than 10 times the available Muslim force, they besieged Medina. The battle, therefore, occupying, as it does, a most prominent place in the early history of Islam, richly deserves the importance it has been accorded. And, the Khandaq and Khaybar, this is related to Khandaq, right? And Khaybar are connected. It wasn't because of the faith of people that did these things, and their place of worship wasn't just, taken over or that sort of thing. Islam didn't do that. It was, here was it's like Mecca. It wasn't, we like this place of worship, we're going to take it over. It was being used for both, even, the Bible and certain Asian sources. They knew about it. The ancient Egyptians knew there was this place in Western Arabia. So that was a little bit different there. But, there's a lot of misconception about, first of all, Muhammad was a real Semite, not one of these descendants of Turks and Russians and Germans. Celt, you could say, because the Germanic people, the Celts, so the Teutonic and the Slavic people and the Turkish people that converted to Judaism, so they're not even Semites. Muhammad was a real Semite, but he wasn't after people just because they were Jews or some ridiculous thing that you're going to hear claimed. The Battle of the Allies took place in Shawwal of the 4th year of the Hijra, and the revelation of this chapter therefore belongs to that year. Most of the other subjects treated herein, such as those relating to the Prophet's marriage with Zainab and to his marriages in general, might be fixed a little later, but they cannot be placed beyond the 7th year of the Hijra. The reason why this chapter occupies place in arrangement of the chapters of Al-Qur'an is quite obvious. Well, you also hear with the sound and stuff too, but the last group of Meccan chapters preceding this announces a series of mighty prophecies foretelling the subsequent greatness of the Muslimin, and here we are shown how the forces employed to crush Islam were made ineffective, thus paving the way for the Muslimin to attain the promised greatness. The first section deals with physical and spiritual relationship in reference to the spiritual relationship of the Prophet with the faithful. The powerful attack of the Quraysh and their allies on the Muslimin spoken of in the second and third sections was really a resort to brute force made with the object of annihilating Islam. Its mention is really meant to give a death blow to the false propaganda that Islam was spread by the sword. The fact being that Islam spread in spite of the sword, the propaganda now carried on against Islam stands on two pillars of misrepresentation, the first relating to the sword and the second relating to the Prophet's domestic life, which propaganda depicts the Prophet as being a voluptuary. Because he didn't deny and criticize the impulses of life. He just, practiced them in principle. As a matter of fact, not only did the Prophet himself retain the utmost simplicity in life to his last days, no change coming over him, though he had risen to be the ruler of the whole of Arabia, but he would not allow even his wives to depart from the high standard of simplicity. It was within his means to furnish his wives with every material comfort, but instead of pandering to their earthly desires, he informed them that if they required such provisions, he could not retain them in his household. This is the subject matter of the fourth section. The fifth section deals with the Prophet's marriage with Zainab and refutes the objections advanced against him on that score. The sixth generalizes the objections raised against his domestic life. The seventh draws the attention of the Muslimin to certain roles of conduct in their domestic relations. The eighth speaks of those who spread evil reports. And the ninth closes the chapter with an exhortation to the faithful. And, I remember a couple, which chapter, we're not going to read the whole Qur'an in Ramadan. So which chapters should we go over? An-Nur and Al-Ahzab, 34 and 33 and 24 was my suggestion repeatedly, actually. Because there's, at the very least, there's certain things about these chapters that people take out of context, and it sounds different. Seize them and kill them wherever you find them. But who? Oh, well, we don't care about what that verse says, or even, some of this stuff, people's like, well, I'm not going to even finish that verse. I'm going to just, it's like, but see, these are the people who don't believe in it. They're going to do whatever anyways. Chapter 34, Al-Sabah. The Shebans. Is that how you say it, Shebans? But Sheba. Revealed in Mecca, 6 sections, 54 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from that of a city of the same name, i.e. Sabah, which was situated in Yemen and was destroyed by a flood. A warning given in this chapter applies to all nations that are made great and prosperous but fall into luxurious habits. Ease engenders evil, which brings decay and ruin. Hence it was a warning to the Quraysh, no doubt, but it is equally a warning to all nations who are made masters of the earth, but fall into the ways of ease and luxury, and suffer the consequences. The first section asserts the truth of the judgment, a judgment of the truth of which is not witnessed only in the life after death, but is clearly seen working in this very life. This judgment overtakes individuals as well as nations, and 2 instances are cited in the second section of how prosperous nations are swept out of existence when they fall into evil ways. Judgment will therefore overtake the Quraysh and their false deities. We are told in the third section, will not avail them in the least. An encounter will be brought about between the two parties, resulting in a victory for the Muslimin. A fourth section describes the plight of the leaders of evil, the leaders and the followers blaming each other. The fifth states that their very deities will be unable to help them, and that they will be punished as deniers of truth. have always been punished. The last section asserts that truth will prosper and falsehood vanish before it. With this chapter, it is introduced another group of 6 Meccan chapters, which in all probability belong to the Middle Meccan period. The first chapter of this group, begins with Alhamdulillah, praise be to Allah, while the last chapter of this group, the 39th, ends with exactly the same words, and thus Allah is praised for bringing about the triumph of truth, which is the subject matter of these chapters. Okay, that's good that it's made clear some of what I've been talking about how you can tell from this in this chapter, this phrase, and just like the Hamims, there's stuff about that. It's like, and you also see why certain, voluntary things that people have done. Hamim, means in Kaf, Hamim. You see in those chapters why those directions were picked. Chapter 35, Al-Fatir, the originator, revealed at Mecca, 5 sections, 45 verses. The title of this chapter, Al-Fatir, is taken from the divine attribute mentioned in its opening verse. The originator of the heavens and the earth sweeps away the old order and generates a new one, because if truth must prosper, a new generation must be raised to propagate that truth. The chapter is also known as Al-Malaika, or the angels, the unfallen angels, the light beings, because of the mention in its opening verse of angels who make men attain the nearness of God. For the date of revelation and relation to the previous chapter, see the introductory note on the last chapter. The first section speaks of divine favors to man, and the second reasserts the promise that truth will prevail. The third section refers to the rising of a new generation, which will take place of the old generation that proved itself unfit to promote the cause of truth and justice in the world. The second section that follows promises peace, safety, success, and abundance to the believers, while the last section reiterates the law that punishment is due to evil deeds. And we can see that sort of paired in a way to Surah 72, Al-Jinn, the fallen angels, the fire beings. By fallen angels, I mean they're a different material. Just like, like fire, clay, light. And the light beings they don't have free will. So, chapter 36, Yasin, revealed at Mecca, 5 sections, 83 verses. The title of this chapter is taken from the initial letters Yasin, in which the Holy Prophet is addressed. The object is to show that man can attest to perfection and thus achieve the real object of his life through contact with the perfect man, Muhammad. It is called the heart of Al-Qur'an, Tirmidhi 43:6, owing to the importance of its subject matter. For the date of revelation and its place in the arrangement of the Holy Qur'an, see the introductory note to chapter 34. This chapter upholds the truth of Al-Qur'an, and the first section shows that, though there would be strong opposition to it in the beginning, it would in the end give life to a dead humanity. The second speaks in parable of its portrayal of earlier revelation. The third draws attention to certain signs of its truth and nature, how life follows death, and how light follows darkness, thus giving an indication that the same law is working in the spiritual world. The fourth shows that its acceptors and rejectors will be dealt with distinctly, so that their reward and requital will be evidence of the truth of Al-Qur'an. The fifth and concluding section draws attention to the resurrection, or the life after death, as this alone can make a man feel responsibility for his actions and bring about his real transformation and attainment of perfection. Now, Surah 36 and 37 also bear a resemblance in their effect, their sound, the colors that you see when you chant them. How else do I put that? Surah chapter 37, Al-Safat, those ranging in ranks. Revealed at Mecca, 5 sections, 182 verses. The title of this chapter, Those Ranging in Ranks, is taken from its opening words, which give a description of the faithful. It is in all likelihood an earlier revelation than the other chapters of this group. See the introduction note to chapter 34. The chapter announces in the first section a clear prophecy of the ultimate prevalence of unity and asserts the truth of the judgment in the second, calls attention to the preachings of Noah, Abraham, Moses, Elias, Lot, and Jonah in the third, fourth, and fifth sections. It concludes with a clear prediction of the triumph of the Holy Prophet. And it's not just a chapter to exercise ball. It's a chapter that has an effect towards all exorcism, really. Chapter 30, Sod, reveal at Mecca, 5 sections, 88 verses. The chapter is entitled Sod from its initial letter, which stands for Sadiq, or truthful God. Let's not pigeonhole the abbreviated letters, but it describes the suffering of prophets at the hands of their enemies. Even prophets like David and Solomon, who ruled mighty kingdoms, and like Job, who had been granted abundance, did not escape opposition and had to suffer at the hands of their enemies. But as the name of the chapter signifies, Allah was a truthful God, who at the height of opposition foretold the discomfiture of the enemy and the final triumph of truth. The date of the revelation of this chapter may be fixed at the same time as that of the preceding one. The opposition had no doubt grown intense, and the earlier emigration may have already taken place, or may have followed it soon. It may be placed about the close of the early Meccan period. The first section clearly speaks of the determined opposition of the enemy and prophesies his discomfiture. But the second asserts how even a king prophet like David had his enemies, and how he was delivered from their hands. The third states that even Solomon, with all his glory, could not escape the opposition of his enemies, yet it was the grace of God, not the glory of his kingdom, that delivered him from his enemies. Job's sufferings are spoken of in the fourth section, and the triumph of the righteous is plainly stated. A typical opposition of the devil to the prophet man forms the subject matter of the concluding sections. And we see that even before the outer success, you have the inner success.